welcome to First Friday.
Thanks.
You'll notice something. This is not like state-of-the-art technology where it looks like we're in the same room. We actually are in the same room. We've been doing these First Friday webinars for 9 months, 10 months. So first time in the room, broadcasting live from Gainesville, Georgia, my old stomping grounds, your current stomping grounds. And today we're going to bust some myths. If you remember that show, Mythbusters, are they still on?
I have no clue.
They're just Mythbusters. So we're going to myth bust inflation myths, as well as some myths around inventory in real estate. So buckle up, get ready. But first off, welcome. If you have any questions, please make sure you share them, because we're broadcasting together. Usually one of us will monitor questions. So we're not going to be able to do that till the very, very end. So make sure you put your questions in and then we'll get to them. But first, meet Ashley Smith.
Hi, guys. I'm Ashley. I am your favorite realtor for First Friday real estate webinars. I really like to consider myself more of a dream maker than a realtor, because whether you are buying your first house, buying your third house, or buying a second or third house, what real estate really is a part of this dream that you have for your life and your family's life. And so being able to help people get there is very fun for me. And sometimes you're going through difficult times in your lives too. I actually just met with some new clients yesterday, and they are getting divorced. So that's a difficult time in their lives, but they both have visions for where they want their lives to go. So we can still be a dream maker and work as a dreamsmith with them too. And they're excited to do that.
Yeah. And I will say that besides just being a dream maker, Ashley also has got some pretty incredible credentials. She's an experienced negotiator, and she has all of these fancy acronyms that mean fancy things. But just know you could not find a better person, but also you couldn't find a more qualified professional.
Thanks.
And well, it's true. And then, hi, I'm Parker. I work with American Financial Network. And I will say we had a closing last month.
Yes.
Yeah. So Kim, if you're watching, hi. Happy that you're in your beautiful new home. Local lender, definitely experienced before becoming a lender. Ashley and I were actually school leaders in Memphis. Not at the same school, but we work closely. Ashley actually led a couple of professional developments at my school. So we go way back, and we're excited to continuing our friendship and partnership out of the school buildings and into different types of buildings, the home kind. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about myth busting, inflation, and inventory. So today, here's what we're going to talk about: is we're going to talk about the truth that inflation actually is going down. Probably doesn't feel like it is, because every 3 to 4 weeks you're going to get like a buzz on your phone from CNN, Fox, wherever you get your news, and they'll say inflation, inflation, inflation. And so it's understandable why you might think that inflation is going up. In reality, inflation's been going down. It's been going down for a while. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about something that you probably have never thought about before, but it is such an important thing to understand and know that it exists, and that are shelter costs. And we're going to talk about why and how shelter costs are lagging and why that's important. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. So I'll do the first kind of 2 points. Then I'm really going to turn it over to Ashley. And I'm really excited for how our webinar is going to end, because you're going to learn something invaluable, which is there is a difference between actual versus listed inventory. And if you can understand the difference between actual inventory versus listed inventory, it's going to make you an incredibly competitive buyer or seller. So let's jump in. Inflation. It is on the way down. And let's talk about how much it's going down.
Before you go into this, Parker, I just want to say, Parker and I have been talking about inflation for the past week or two. Well, really, probably the past 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years, yeah.
But this is something that's can be very confusing, because there's inflation, there's interest rates that people look at. And so Parker's going to try his best, and I think he's going to do a really good job of explaining a little bit more about like what inflation is, how we get inflation, and then how that impacts other things such as mortgage interest rates.
Yeah. That's a good. We'll see if I can.
You got it.
Yeah. No. All right. So let's talk about when inflation started to go up and when it actually really peaked. So let's go back to COVID times. right? We all remember COVID. COVID hit and the economy completely shut down. When the economy shut down by choice, the Federal Reserve, they lowered their rate to 0%, which all that means is that it cost banks 0% to borrow money. And if banks can borrow money really cheaply, that means they can lend money really cheaply. So what happens when you get access to money cheaply? Well, it starts making it a lot easier to spend money. And if it's easier to spend money, well, then it's easier for companies to charge more. Mm-hmm. So then you put that on top of all of a sudden, all these supply chain issues were happening. And you probably saw this first with like groceries during COVID. All of a sudden, like watermelons were costing like, $18. Right. That's not true, but no, like food started to skyrocket. And then the next thing that people probably started to notice with inflation, cars became incredibly expensive, especially used cars, so on and so forth. And obviously what pertains to us is houses, home prices started to really skyrocket. And so why is inflation such a big deal? Well, inflation is a big deal because if everything's becoming 6 to 7% more expensive every single year, that means that your wage, how much money you're making, needs to keep up. And I don't know about you, but I'm not making a 7% annual raise. No. And so if how much money you're making is being outpaced by things becoming more expensive, that becomes a really big issue. Mm-hmm. So what the Federal Reserve did is they started to raise their rate, which means it became more expensive for banks to borrow money. And if it's more expensive for banks to borrow money, it's more expensive for us to borrow money, which means it's harder to get money. And so the Federal Reserve, the federal government, they're trying to cool down the economy. So let's actually talk about what we mean when we say inflation has peaked and is on the way down. You can see September of 2022, that's really when inflation peaked. It was at 6.8%, meaning if we were to look back at September of 2021, life had become 6.8% more expensive. That's a big deal. Yeah. But you'll also notice, because this is when mortgage rates, and we'll get to that in a second, this is when mortgage rates started to go up. The Federal Reserve started to raise their rate. And as the Federal Reserve raised their rate, the economy started to cool down. And slowly but surely, you can see that inflation has started to go down to where we're now at around 5.4, 5.5%. The question you're probably asking is like, all right, so when's what the Fed's doing is working. So when are they going to actually start lowering their rate? Probably not for a while, because they want inflation to be at 2%. That's their goal target. So now, will the Fed keep raising their rate? Actually, probably not. But they're certainly not going to lower their rate for a while because they want to continue to see inflation go down to 2%. So why is that important, and how does that relate to buying homes and mortgage rates? Well, that's a great question. And that's where this fancy chart that looks like it was made in 1994.
It looks like an Atari game.
Yes, it does. It does look like pixelated. So let me actually try to activate if I can. Can I get a laser pointer? I can. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about what we're looking at. Red, the Fed. Red is the Fed. Red's the Fed. Red's the Fed. All right. Black is something called your prime rate. We're going to ignore that. That's for a completely different webinar that nobody will attend. For our purposes, though, 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That's going to be blue. So we're going to be patriotic today. Fed is red, mortgage rates blue. So now let's go back to May of 2020. What's happening May of 2020? COVID. Look at this. We're at 0%. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And you'll also notice mortgage rates are around 3. We're into like a 2%, 3, 3, 3. So it looks like the Fed's rate and mortgage rates are kind of in lockstep with each other. Here's why, though, Ashley. While the Fed had their rate at 0%, they were also guaranteeing the purchasing of mortgage-backed securities. So a bank could offer a sub 3% interest rate, and the Federal Reserve was guaranteeing that they were going to buy all of those mortgage-backed securities to keep everything liquid. Okay. Well, when the Fed decided to raise their rate, and you can see we got a lot of raises coming, they also stopped buying mortgage-backed securities. And so when that happened, look what happened to mortgage rates, right? Yes. But here's what's really interesting. you'll notice starting in 2022 of April, the Fed has continued to raise their rate. It has been like, it literally looks like a staircase, right? But let's look at mortgage rates. It's certainly going up, but is it a perfect staircase? No, not at all. Actually, and this is, I think, the best point to give. So notice that we've got right here, we've got mortgage rates kind of at a peak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it corresponds with a rate being raised.
Mm-hmm.
Well, rates get raised again here. Well, while a rate's being raised, you actually had a dip in mortgage rates. Same thing, started to climb. The Fed still raised their rate. So even though the Fed's rate's going up, look what's happening to mortgage rates. They're starting to go down. So this is the big takeaway I want people to understand. When you get an alert on your phone that the Federal Reserve has raised their rate, that does not mean that mortgage rates are going up. These are both mortgage rates, the blue, and the Federal Reserve's rate, the red. They are both very sensitive to inflation. But here's the big difference. The red line, this is the Federal Reserve trying to control inflation. They're trying to raise their rate to bring inflation down. Mortgage-backed securities, mortgage rates, they're not controlling inflation. They are reactive to inflation. So this is a really good example. Do you see how steep these staircases are right here? Yes. Right? Like boom, boom. Now notice these stairs, not as boomy. That's the technical term, right? And so even though the Fed is still raising their rate, they're not raising it as steeply with each raise as they were. And so look what's happening. Though the Fed's rate's going up, ever since they started doing baby staircase increases, mm-hmm. That's all the market needed to see for mortgage rates to start coming down. And why has the Fed started to not have such steep increases? Because inflation is going down. What they're doing is working. So I want everybody who's watching this to stop freaking out when you see that the Fed has raised their rate or the Fed isn't lowering their rate, because at the end of the day, it's really about what's inflation doing. And if inflation is starting to get under control, which it has been for a while, mortgage rates will follow suit. All right. So let's go back to our main key takeaway number one. Inflation is on the way down. All right. Now let's go to shelter costs and what that has to do. So we've talked a lot about inflation. How do we measure inflation? If you remember that 6.8% that was right here, how is that even measured? Well, this is the next really big thing I want everyone to understand, because if you understand this, you'll understand shelter costs.
I never knew what shelter costs were before this.
You know, so. I just read the most exciting things on a day-to-day basis. So before we talk about this slide, which is all about CPI, and that's how we measure inflation, let's define shelter costs first. Shelter costs, all a shelter cost is it's the cost of keeping a roof over your head. So it's going to calculate things like rent. Is rent going up? Is it going down? And if you own your home, it's going to calculate average mortgage rates as well as mortgage prices or payments, your property taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, and even your utilities. So this is a big bucket when it comes to CPI, shelter costs. Mm-hmm. Essentially, how expensive is it to keep a roof over your head? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think we talked about, as far as the bucket goes, we Googled this the other day. It's about 1/3 of all of the items in the CPI, which you're about to talk about next, is shelter costs, right?
Yep, so that's exactly right.
That's a big part of the bucket.
It's a huge part, 1/3, but also if you've got the other two buckets, the other 2/3 out of whack, then that can actually disguise or cover up any improvements that we're seeing in shelter costs. So let's talk about CPI. So the Consumer Price Index, CPI, I want you to think of it like a grocery list. All right. So the CPI is going to check the average price changes of common stuff. So for example, how much has food gone up from last year to this year?
Those watermelons, those
$18 watermelons.
I would still buy them.
I promise I actually grocery shop. I'm not one of those like trust fund kids who's like, how much is milk? $20? I don't know. I know watermelons don't cost $18. Also medical care and transportation. Now, remember though, when we're measuring, it's not like 2022 to 2023, whatever month we're in. So we're in June right now. When the CPI comes out for June, it's measuring how expensive were things June of 2022 compared to June of 2023. So you kind of have a year lag at all time.
Yes.
So it's going to measure all of these different things. Household items, also shelter costs, which we talked about, and oil, which we all know how stable and predictable oil prices are, right?
Extremely.
So predictable and stable. So what do we mean when we say that shelter costs, that's 1/3 of the CPI bucket, are lagging? And I'm just going to read this so that I stay on message here. So when someone says shelter costs are lagging the CPI, what they mean is that they're not keeping up. So for example, if CPI, that measures inflations, went up 3% this year, but shelter costs only went up 1%, then what that means is that shelter costs are going up just a little bit, a healthy amount. 1% is, that's kind of, things are going to get more expensive as time goes on. So 1% increase, that's super healthy, right?
Definitely.
But if you see the CPI number is at 3%, then it's disguising the fact that shelter costs have actually started to really stabilize. So let's actually look at this graph right here. This represents your apartment list rent year over year change. Okay. So January of 2022, if we compared January of 2022 to January of 2021, you can see life, especially if you're renting, became a heck of a lot more expensive. Right.
That might be why some more people decided to buy homes at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because think of it, your rent's going up almost 20%. It's crazy. But now, ever since inflation has started to go down, you can see shelter costs are starting to stabilize. And so, yes, like renting has become more expensive, but you're kind of on par with where you were like before COVID started. So we saw a huge spike, and now they've kind of come down, these shelter costs. Now, I'm sorry, go.
I have a question.
Sure.
So the CPI influences inflation, or is the CPI inflation?
CPI is, for all intents and purposes, CPI is inflation, meaning it's like, it's the word we use. It's the term attached to the percentage for how much inflation is going up or down.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in this chart, if it says shelter costs are lagging, then, I mean, we just talked about what inflation is. It's like 5 point something. So if shelter costs are only 3% and the rest of everything else is like 5%, then that's what it means. It's like, the cost of staying in a home or living right now is 2% less than the cost of everything else.
That's exactly right. So I think one way of this just occurred to me. I really like your question is, so imagine that like you and I, we're going to take our families and we're all going to go on a big vacation, some all-inclusive resort.
Let's just go somewhere
fun. I discuss somewhere fun, all-inclusive resort. Right. Great. And let's say that I reveal to you that like, hey, our vacation, it costs $10,000.
Is that for everybody or just one person?
That is going to be for one person. You're like, oh, wow, that's a really expensive vacation. So you're going to start making assumptions about, they must be staying at like the Ritz-Carlton. They're probably like, having a private cabanas, all of that.
Yeah.
Well, what if I were to tell you that when you actually itemize that bill of $10,000, that Ashley here insisted that we all fly first class. And let's say that first class ticket, right, actually costs like $7,000.
Oh, yeah.
So was that vacation? So now if we're making a judgment that we're staying at too nice of a hotel, or if we're making the judgment like, oh, all-inclusive hotels sure are more expensive than they used to be, that's actually an unfair assumption. Because if you actually look at the price tag of $10,000, it's not that vacations have unilaterally become more expensive. It might just be that airplane tickets have become more expensive, or you're being forced to fly first class.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what Ashley's saying is exactly right. When we go back to here, if you see in September that inflation, that CPI is at 6.8%.
Yes.
You need to look at shelter costs, because if shelter costs are lagging, what that means, right, is that your shelter costs, how expensive it is to live or how much more expensive living has become, it might actually be at a really healthy level. It may not be at 6.8%. watermelons and oil might be at 12%.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, this number right here, it's an average of 3 very different but very important buckets. Does that make sense?
Totally. So just for fun, let's see what the shelter costs were in around September of 2022.
Okay.
That would be like there.
Like right
July.
here, right? Oh, July.
Yeah.
September. So like right
So there.
here.
So in that case, the shelter costs were kind of on par with the inflation at that time.
That's right. So what this probably tells us is your shelter costs, when inflation was at its highest, your shelter costs had already started to come down. So that's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, because when we're talking about, now you're like, what does this have to do with inventory? Well, think about the two things that impact the psychology of a buyer and a seller. One, inflation, which has a direct impact on mortgage rates. Do you think interest rates for mortgages are important to buyers and sellers? Absolutely. 100%. And then also shelter costs, meaning how expensive is it to rent? How expensive is it to buy? These are all things that are very public, especially out in the media, and that influences, oftentimes incorrectly influences, the mindset and psychology of a buyer and a seller. And so how do we actually assess how a market's actually doing? Well, Ashley's going to talk to us about calculating actual versus real inventory.
Yes, and it impacts, which Parker didn't use these words, but supply and demand.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly right.
And that's the other thing that is going to be on your mind when you're being a buyer. You're saying, okay, what's out there, and how many other buyers are there looking? So the number of buyers is often going to be determined by the interest rate.
Interest rate, yep.
And then the supply is going to be determined by sellers who think that they're going to be able to make a good amount on their homes.
Or sellers, they may make a ton of money on their homes, but they feel like they can't go out there and get a good deal on a house. So they're like, I'm just going to sit on it.
Right.
Yeah.
That happens. So a lot of you guys watching this webinar, unless you have a real estate agent who set you up on a special site, like what we have at Dreamsmith, to be able to search for properties very specifically, you're probably looking at things like Zillow, Realtor.com, to be able to see what's out there on the market.
It's how I fall asleep every night, just endlessly scrolling through Redfin and Realtor.com. It's just like, it's an adult version of a video game. It's like, well, what house can I not afford?
Well, how would it be if we lived in this home?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So when you're on those sites, you're going to see like how many homes are for sale in this particular market, in this particular price range, and these particular number of bedrooms and bathrooms. And so in this example we're giving, there's 980,000 homes that you see that are for sale.
Right.
The problem is when you're looking at Zillow or Realtor.com, Redfin, Trulia, any of those sites, they're not really representing what the actual or real inventory is. So the reason for that is because there are a lot of those 980 homes are actually under contract.
Wait, so if I see on Zillow that like let's say coming, right?
Yeah.
And I go on Zillow and I say, all right, houses max 500,000. And I see that it comes up incoming. I've got 1,100 houses for sale.
Yes.
What you're telling me is that like there actually aren't 1,100 houses for sale?
It's true.
Okay. That's like I'm being lied to.
Yeah. And you guys might have had experience yourself sending a home to one of your realtors saying, I want to go see this house. And then your realtor.
It's under contract.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's giving you a very wrong picture of the number of homes that are actually available. So in this case, if there's actually 402,000 homes that are under contract, then how many homes are available now?
So if Zillow is saying that there are 980,000 homes available, but out of those 402,000 are actually under contract, then like essentially half of this inventory that I think exists doesn't exist.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. Also, another way you can look at it as a potential seller, or we'll talk about it from both ends, but from a potential seller is, man, I thought there were 980,000 homes available.
Which if you think there are that many, you might be like, oh, we're listing it too high. I can't get that good of a dollar on
exactly.
it. Right.
And then if you see that, gosh, almost half of them are under contract.
Which you would be able to tell them because you have access to the real data.
Yes. The other data I can tell you is how long did it take those 402,000 to go under contract?
Oh, that's interesting. Right. So if you've got half the inventory under contract and they're quickly going under contract, then the seller might think, oh, it's a fool's errand to list my home. No one's going, like there's so much inventory. when in reality, they might actually be able to get like top dollar for their house.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Same from a buyer's perspective. We want to be looking at that exact same information. And you say, okay, there's actually not 908,000. There's only 580,000 or whatever the number is
right
now. So how are we going to be able to put in a strong offer based on, again, looking at data of ones that have gone under contract? How long did it take? How are they priced? What was the condition of the home at that time?
Yeah.
And it helps us be able to put in a strong offer based on that information.
Right. Because if you think that there's all this inventory for you to get, then you might offer on a home that you really love, but you lowball the seller thinking that like, oh, and then you lose out on a home you really love. Now, it could cut both ways, right? So like if we have 980,000 listings, but only 100,000 are actually under contract, then that would cut more to like, you're like, hey, buyer that I'm representing.
Yes.
This house is priced at this, but look, out of all of coming, like you've got almost 85% of the inventory not under contract. So I think this is overpriced. We should. Okay. That makes sense.
Exactly. That's perfect. So all we do is subtract.
You're telling me the answer to this math in her head was right here on the next slide.
I was kind of hoping
bless
you
this
could
mess.
Just throw out the answer.
Yeah.
For
578. 578,000.
But let's look at some real information here. So on Zillow, what I did was I pulled up in Cumming, Georgia. Thanks, Parker. I pulled up in Cumming, Georgia, all the homes that are for sale right now between 475,000 and 575,000. Because you might be like, I want to buy a house. I don't want to spend more than like 525.
Okay.
Well, you should still look at that higher range because sometimes we can get the seller down, or you might see a home for 575 that is so perfect you're willing to pay 575. I kept that range. I put a really specific requirement on here, which is it has to have 5 bedrooms only, and at least three or more bathrooms.
Okay. Yep.
So of that, according to Zillow, there are
let's see. Maybe we have to click
15 homes. Okay. So then I also looked at realtor.com.
All right, go to the next one.
Yep.
Okay.
And same exact search criteria.
Okay.
And then they have 13 homes.
Mm.
So somebody's wrong already, right? But the question is like, what are they pulling or what are they not pulling? So then go to the next slide, Parker, if you don't mind. So let's see what's actually available. So we've got, we got 13 on realtor.com, 15 on Zillow.
Okay.
And then we have, here they are again. So then we have the portal where I can do these searches for you a little bit, just more actually, there's like so many ways I can dig. There's hundreds of ways I can dig in for you, which is really fun, but also can make you go down some bunny trails. So try not to do that.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
There are only 4.
There's 4. Click that button.
Shut up.
Yep. 4.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy. Those are the ones that are actually active that are not.
They're not under contract.
Now, if you also include the ones that are under contract or pending, which is also under contract, then that number goes to 16. So Zillow,
nobody was right.
Well, right.
Well, you were right with the 4, but like even the wrong numbers for Zillow and Realtor still are wrong. Okay.
I did play around with the pending number of days. And I think for one of them, it's like if it's pending within the last 30 days, so it's been under contract for 30 days, but it still hasn't closed. And the other one was like pending for like 45 days. So I think those are the numbers they pull from. But again, 4 is a very big number, different number than 13 and 15.
That's me thinking I can spend all day Saturday and all day Sunday looking at houses, when in reality, it's just going to be like a 3-hour block on Saturday.
Exactly.
So that's really, so if I am like, I have to be in a school district.
Yep.
I've got this many people I want a house, which means I've got to have 5 bedrooms and I've got to have at least 3 bathrooms and I've got to live in Cumming. I mean, even looking at Zillow and Realtor, I'm like, God, that's not that many.
Right.
But then
it's not a lot.
No, but then I see it's actually 4.
Yes.
If I've got to make it happen, like I am absolutely going to do my best offer. And if I'm not doing my best offer, if you are the realtor as good as you and you're representing the seller for one of these 4, then you can also pull up me like, yeah, they offered 5K under list. Like there are no, like we are one of the only bells at the ball.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting.
Yes.
I hope everybody realizes that it is so important to have a realtor. I cannot tell you how many times I pre-approve somebody who doesn't have a realtor and they're like, we're fine. You're actually not fine. You are losing out on thousands of dollars. As a buyer, you don't even pay the realtor. It's actually the seller that pays your realtor. But even if you are a seller and you're doing a listing, you're still losing out on a ton of money, because let's say that you're listing and you think and you get a offer that's 5K under your list, right? And you're doing it for sale by owner. Well, you might look up a Zillow realtor and be like, you know what, that's a pretty good deal. We should probably take it. But if you have Ashley as your listing agent, Ashley's going to be like, heck no, you shouldn't take 5K under list. If anything, we should probably increase our list price, because now that we know we only got 4 on the market, like let's go. So that's very, very interesting.
Yes.
Okay. So what's the big takeaway for interpreting actual inventory?
I mean, I think we've just talked about the big takeaway is it's important for you to know really what's actually out there, because it's going to help you as a seller to know how to price your house the best way, and also what you should expect.
And what offer. Yeah. Or if I'm a listing, I'm like, I need to know this data in order to say yes or no to an offer.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer, you need to know that data so that you know how to push, be quick on an offer, or not be quick on an offer, or, maybe wait, or maybe even may ask a little bit under asking, depending on what the market's looking like. The only way you're going to know this is to know what's actually out there, and then have someone who knows how to go through what is under contract and how did it get under contract.
That's really, so just so you all know, there are some times where I'm working with one of Ashley's buyers, right? And Ashley, they're interested in a house, and Ashley like, hey, can we get an updated letter? Get to it when you can get to it. And then there'll be some times where you'll be like, hey, I'm on the side of a mountain and I've stolen somebody's satellite phone. I need an updated pre-approval letter right now. We've got to get this offer in.
I think that happened last week.
Yeah, it was like, you were just like I need it now. But this actually makes a lot of sense, because I'm sure you're looking at the underlying numbers and you're like, this is like a casual, let's kind of poke and prod, it'll still be here, versus you're like, yeah, we got to get this right now.
We got to put in an offer right now, and hopefully they'll accept it right now, so nobody else will put in an offer in this house.
Hopefully you guys are seeing the value of having, obviously you want a realtor and a lender, but when it comes to this kind of stuff though, at the end of the day, I just got to make sure you can afford it. This to me really, really shows, and there were some webinars where it's like, this shows the value of a good lender. This webinar to me really, really shows why, whether you're buying or selling, you've got to have not just a realtor, but like a really good realtor.
Yeah.
And we've got a webinar, I think it was like our second or third one, that was like what the questions you should ask when selecting a realtor.
Yes.
So I'd encourage y'all to subscribe first Friday, and then also look at that handout and that recording. This is the second or third one that we did, because it's not just about getting a realtor, it's about getting the right realtor. And then Ashley will actually walk you through the questions that she feels like everyone should ask her before they agree to work with her. So it's really good. You should download that. But why is this important? We already talked about it, but Ashley, in a couple of words, like, why is it important to know actual inventory?
Well, at the end of the day, I think this last sentence is the most important thing. It really can influence the pricing of a home, negotiating, whether you're a seller or a buyer or both. And then just your strategy. How am I going to approach this, I don't know, this mountain as a buyer? Like, oh my gosh, I got to find a new house, or I want to find a new house. Sometimes you've got a timeline where you have to get it by. Other times you're like, I just want to find my dream home. So if it takes me 6 years, that's fine. But to have a strategy and knowing when you have found that dream home, how are you going to approach it quickly with negotiations? Same for sellers, mostly strategy on pricing, how long to wait before lowering a price if you are going to lower a price.
Yeah.
And then who are we reaching out to make sure that we are finding buyers for our listings? So I just thought of a metaphor. Maybe this is a good way to end it before we go to questions. So you remember in high school, it was always like, I would say anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks before prom. Okay. All right. And I just, whether you went to prom or not, like nobody ever just blindly asked prom dates. That was always like the buzz in the hall, is who's been asked, who said yes, who said no, who wants to go, who doesn't want to go. So you ask any junior or senior in a high school 6 to 8 weeks before prom, who's going with who, you'll probably get like freakishly accurate answers. Yes. Right. And why is that important? Because if you don't have a prom date, you kind of need to know how aggressive you need to be in asking, and also how aggressive you need to be in saying yes or no. Mm-hmm. And so
if we do that with something as basic and silly as going to prom in high school, then why are we not doing this when it comes to buying and selling homes? You know,
That's a great
there you
metaphor.
go. I majored in English, but computers helped me get the numbers right. All right, let's stop the share and let's actually look to see if we have any questions. We have got no questions, but we're going a little bit over, but I'm going to ask one question for you, Ashley.
All right. I'm ready.
So if I am, actually, it's two questions. I lied to you.
Oh,
all right. So if I am one of your buyers, you're representing me, I'm a buyer. All right. And let's say that I've offered on a house and we lose out on it. All right. But then you have me submit a backup offer. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that a couple of weeks go by. And then sure enough, that original offer that we lost to drops out. And then the agent calls you and says, hey, we're good. Like, we'll accept the backup offer. Do you look and see what the market's done? And can you renegotiate that backup offer? Because this data that you're showing, it seems so fluid and live. It feels like it really can change like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So like if I have a backup offer in, can you like renegotiate that for me? Or is what it is at that point?
If you had a true backup offer, like with a real estate form attached to it, that says this is the backup offer. If this buyer backs out, we are going to accept your offer. Right. Then the offer is what it is.
Interesting.
Yes.
So do you recommend that? Like, do you have your folks officially submit backup offers, or do you just like do you tell the listing agent just to keep you on speed dial? Or does it depend?
It depends 100%. It would depend on what the house is, how little inventory there is for other things that we're looking for. And I've been in we've never that I can remember, maybe during COVID, but not recently, have we submitted backup offers that are over list price.
Okay.
But they've been, at list price. We're like, that's a fair price.
Right.
And we really want the house. So, but we've also submitted some that are under, and that's why we didn't win the first bid, right? But we kind of knew that they weren't getting another offer. So we're like, will you accept this as a backup offer? Right. And it allowed us to know that if the first person went through, we'd get this at a very good deal.
Yeah, interesting.
So it really does depend.
Okay.
What was your second question?
Second question is from the listing side. So if you're like you strike me as someone who's really monitoring inventory data pretty closely, daily basis, I would say. At least weekly.
Probably multiple times a day.
Not even daily, multiple times a day.
In certain markets that I work in.
Right.
Yeah.
How often are you approaching a seller for one of your listings and being like, hey, we actually need to increase our price, or hey, we need to decrease our price? Or do you really have to see a ton of market movement to justify the changing of a list price? Does that question make sense?
That's a good question. For me, so far, at least, we talk before we even go live on the market. We have a plan for what's going to be things that would make us increase or decrease our price.
Okay.
The biggest reason for that is when you are selling a house, is your home is like your baby.
Right.
And so it can be very emotional. That's another reason why you get a realtor. But if we're trying to make decisions like in the moment because something has happened and we're reacting to it, then it's really easy sometimes to make bad decisions.
Yeah, that's why you should have that parameters kind of discussed up front.
So we talk about it up front. And a lot of that depends on the seller's timeline. I've got someone right now who we just listed it, I think 1.5 or 2 weeks ago. And I called her, I said, how are you feeling about everything? She's like, I'm not in a hurry to sell the house. So, we're not going to be lowering the price anytime soon. There's no need to. We haven't gotten feedback that that's necessary. Then I have someone with a more higher price tag and they're like, maybe it's priced too high. I said, maybe, but I feel like we haven't reached all the buyers, the potential buyers. We've reached all the potential buyers in Metro Atlanta, but now it's time to reach all the potential buyers in the United States.
Yeah. That makes sense. Especially in your market where you have like vacation home buyers and all that. Yeah.
So after we do that, we're giving it 30 more days. And if we haven't gotten like a great response, we'll probably lower the price a little bit and see what happens. But so it's really a plan we kind of set out up front.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Can't be too reactive. You got to have a plan up front. I like that.
You can be reactive, but then in the end, everybody might still be happy in the end. But during the middle of it, people sometimes aren't very happy with their realtor, or you're not happy with your client because everyone's just making decisions based on emotions.
I had folks who were under contract but have not locked in, and they were panicking, wanting to lock because they saw rates going up.
Yes.
But I knew it was like, we're going to have bigger issues than high interest rates if the government defaults in their debt. So I was like, this is all posturing. And I was it was a bet. I was like, we're going to get this figured out. We're not going to default in our debt. And once we don't default in our debt and it gets figured out, rates will go back down to where they were 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
And sure enough, that's happening.
Yes.
So great. There you go. But you got to have that plan, because if you don't see the bigger picture, then you can get emotional and reactive and just be like, okay, I'll lock you. And if I had been like, okay, that's fine, then I would have had customers who would have had like a 0.5% higher rate than they would have. So
yeah,
got to have a plan, guys. Got to have a good lender. Got to have a good realtor. We're a little bit over. Thank y'all so much for joining us. Make sure you subscribe so you can get our handout. You can access prior recordings until July, the first Friday in July. This is Parker. That's Ashley. We'll see y'all soon.
See you.
Thanks.